Fear isn't always sweaty palms or a throbbing heart. Fear isn't always fight or flight. Sometimes fear is freeze. What if your inability to reach your goals isn't about a lack of preparation, but is really about paralysis? What if fear is showing up in your life as immobility? If that's you, then you're in the right place. My name is Rewa, and welcome to Pressing Toward the Mark Productions, a channel for broken, hidden women who've been heavy from the weight of emptiness, and they are searching for a safe place to exchange their broken pieces for God's perfect peace so that they can live whole and healthy lives. Using the biblical story of the man at the Pool of Bethesda in John chapter 5, and inspired by my blog, Withered and Waiting, this video series will highlight 4 lessons that I believe we can learn from the man at the Pool of Bethesda. In this week's video, part 1 of the From Withered and Waiting 2 Whole and Walking video series, we're talking about an issue that affects a lot of women, and that is fear. Now, before we learn anything from the man at the Pool of Bethesda, we first have to become familiar with his story. So I'm going to read to you John chapter 5, verses 1 through 9, King James Version. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is at Jerusalem by the sheep market a pool, which is called in the Hebrew tongue Bethesda, having 5 porches. In these lay a great multitude of impotent folk, of blind, halt, withered, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain season into the pool and troubled the water. Whosoever then first, after troubling of the water, stepped in, was made whole of whatsoever disease he had. And a certain man was there, which had an infirmity 38 years. When Jesus saw him lie, and knew that he had been now a long time in that case, he saith unto him, Wilt thou be made whole? The impotent man answered him, Sir, I have no man, when the water is troubled, to put me into the pool. But while I am coming, another steppeth down before me. Jesus said unto him, Rise, take up thy bed, and walk. And immediately the man was made whole, and took up his bed, and walked. And on the same day was the Sabbath. Now, one morning before work, I read this passage of scripture, and it reminded me of an incident from my childhood. My elementary school best friend invited me to go tubing with her and her family. Now, I was inexperienced with water activities, but I went anyway. Now, again, this was my first experience with tubing, and in my inexperience, I flipped over and dropped beneath the water. The river wasn't rushing, the water wasn't deep. But in my inexperience, I panicked. And that fear, I realized, came from my Aunt Betty. My Aunt Betty was my dad's sister. She passed away long before I was ever born. My Aunt Betty, the stories that I heard of her were primarily about the way that she died, and that was by drowning. So as a young girl, I grew up learning to be afraid of water. And that's not because of anything that my family tried to instill in me or caution me against. Just the stories about it sowed a seed of fear in me that I never recovered from. So instead of learning how to swim, I instead became afraid of water. Not so afraid that I wouldn't go in, I just wouldn't go in too far. Safety, I thought, was in the shallow end. I wasn't so afraid that I wouldn't go near water. I just wouldn't get too close. Safety, I thought, was at the shoreline. So fear of the water had its hooks in me for years. It formed how I related to water. If I kept a safe distance, then I wouldn't drown. I didn't trust the water to let me back out. Where in your life do you see a relationship between trust and fear? John chapter 5 doesn't state or even imply that the man at the Pool of Bethesda was afraid. But fear in this situation can be a reasonable assumption. He had been at the pool every day for 38 years. So let's think about it. What might you be afraid of if you had been in the same spot every day for 38 years? So the man at the Pool of Bethesda, he'd waited a long time. So long, in fact, that perhaps he was afraid that he'd never walk or never walk again. He may have been afraid that people would tire of bringing him to the pool, that he'd have no more chances at health and wholeness. Maybe he was afraid that his condition was too far gone. He had been doing this every day for 38 years. Maybe he was thinking, it's too late for me. Maybe the longer he waited, the more afraid he became. I'm the woman at Bethesda, and perhaps you are too. Now, when I'm talking about fear, I'm not talking about anxiety disorders. I'm talking about fear in a more generalized sense. Now, when the body senses danger, we protect ourselves in one of three ways. When our body perceives a threat, it goes into survival mode. Its responses can be fight, which is to confront or overpower the threat, or a response could be flight, to escape or dodge the threat. Or the body can freeze, which means that it becomes immobile or stuck, where it lacks the ability to confront or escape. Fight, flight, and freeze can also be spiritual trauma responses as well. Tomorrow is the threat, and next is the nemesis. Fear, by definition, or by biblical definition, is timidity or cowardice. So in a spiritual sense, fight can show up looking like resistance or combativeness. Maybe that looks like resistance to God, over performance, or striving. Flight, in a spiritual sense, perhaps looks like staying surface level with God, avoiding intimacy with Him. You're avoiding and looking for an escape. Freeze, you're shut down, you're paralyzed. This may look like stillness that you spiritualize as patience. Fight or flight, they may feel wrong to you. So you freeze, doing nothing, because you feel like that feels more right. Now, when we look at the man at the Pool of Bethesda, we don't see fight or flight. We actually see freeze. And so when we look at ourselves as women at the Pool of Bethesda, we may see paralysis by fear. Little to no movement. But that's usually not a physical condition. It's usually paralysis in the mind, the way that we think. We believe that we can't move. But why do we believe that? We want to live limitless lives, so let's ask ourselves a few questions. Let's locate our beliefs so that we can see where we are and where we need to take the limits off. So, here we go. A few questions. Have you been made to feel like you're not enough? Are you afraid that if you show up for yourself, then everyone around you is going to see your insufficiency? Are you one of those women who's always done everything well, who's always been productive? Now God is calling you out and you're afraid of starting small. Are you so used to harvest that now you're afraid of the seed form? What if God is calling you to more by asking you to do less? Are you afraid of what that means? Are you afraid of how that looks? Or are you afraid of being too small for the big thing that God is calling you to do? Maybe God is calling you to the deep and you're afraid that you can't stay afloat in those waters. Maybe you've told yourself that proximity to the water is just good enough. But what if proximity is actually phobia? What keeps you from going only so far? Is it your personality? Is it your physical appearance? Your relationship or socioeconomic status? Your education level? Maybe you didn't have a good relationship with your mother or your father, and you're afraid that other people won't accept you either. Is rejection the root of your fear? Are you afraid to apply for the job, to ask for the raise or the promotion? Are you afraid to start the business or take the course? Confession is good for the soul, they say. So if you're honest with yourself, if you're really honest, what are you afraid of? Is it remaining hidden, publicity or privacy? Is it success or failure? Is it life staying the same or life finally changing? Is it greatness or mediocrity? Is it being needed or being needy? Is it hope or hopelessness? That fear, what is it keeping you from? Maybe your fear, though, isn't really any of that. Perhaps your fear is an adoption that fell through and you're afraid of trying again. You're afraid of getting your hopes up. Maybe you're one of the almost 600,000 Black women in America who's facing unemployment. You're depleting your savings and you're afraid of losing everything that you've worked for. Perhaps your marriage is strained and you're afraid that the relationship is unsalvageable. So how do you get past that trauma response? How do you get past that fear? First, I don't believe that God is asking us to be fearless. Fear is a natural emotion. I do think, though, I do believe that God would like to use fear as an invitation. And I say that because fear reveals a need, and that need is for protection. And protection is God's job. 2 Timothy 1:7 tells us that God hasn't given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Again, the biblical definition of fear is timidity or cowardice. Fight is resistance and combativeness. Well, let's go back to the scripture. What might God be telling us that will counter fight? Well, that might be power. God hasn't given us a spirit of fear, but of power. So maybe power is the antidote, if you will, for fight. Power is the supernatural ability to act. Flight, again, avoidant, looking for escape, avoiding intimacy with God. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love. Perhaps love is the antidote for flight. God's love enables compassionate action. Freeze. You're shut down. You're paralyzed. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and of a sound mind. So perhaps the antidote for freeze is discipline and discernment that allows wise living. So you may ask, well, how do I not fear the next? My answer is this: fear it. That's okay. You don't have to conquer the fear. Fear is an invitation for the Father to father you. But do it, whatever it is, do it scared. Take the next step and then stay obedient and submitted as the Lord leads them. There was a time in my life where I had left a job and I was waiting on God for the next assignment where He wanted to place me. But He wasn't moving very fast, and I had been waiting for a long time. And because I was worried, afraid that God wasn't going to come through, on my birthday, my mother gave me a little card, and the scripture for my birth date was Luke 12:25. And that scripture that my mother gave me as a gift on my birthday to encourage me to stop worrying, I'm going to give to you today. Luke chapter 12, verse 25, but I'm also going to read through verse 31. Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? Consider how the wildflowers grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon, in all of his splendor, was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today, and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, how much more will He clothe you, ye of little faith? And do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink. Do not worry about it. For the pagan world runs after such things, and your Father knows that you need them. But seek His kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. So you may also ask, what if I'm afraid of not being prepared? Get prepared. Prepare for, make room for what you're believing God for. But you're never going to feel fully prepared. So don't let preparation or the lack thereof be an excuse for not moving. If you're frozen, get close to the heat source. Don't be afraid to get close to Jesus. What does this look like practically? I would say journal. I would encourage you to let your soul speak. I have a plaque on the wall of my office that says, when the mind is quiet, the soul will speak. Get still with God and write your heart out. Identify those areas where you're fearful. God already knows anyway. He's just waiting for you to turn those fears over to Him. So after you've journaled, after you've written your heart out, I want you to sit with a question. What are you afraid would happen if Jesus actually healed you? What could be on the other side of fear? Just like my friend's father picked me up that day while we were inner tubing and set me back down the river, God the Father is near to us, and He's waiting to right us and set us gently back on course. God hasn't given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. You've got this because He's got you. Jesus saw the man at the Pool of Bethesda before he ever approached him. And Jesus sees you too. Press on, sis. Press on. If this has resonated with you, please like, please share, please comment, and please subscribe. Don't walk this journey alone. Join the community.